The sound of the shovel hitting frozen earth had stopped 3 days ago, and Delilah Winters had not moved from the grave since. Xavier Reed had been riding through Chloride, Arizona on his way to Silver City when he spotted her, a dark figure hunched beside a fresh mound of dirt in the small cemetery on the edge of town. That had been on a cold January morning in 1882, and now it was the 3rd day, and she was still there. The winter had been unusually harsh this year, even for the Arizona highlands, and though snow was rare in these parts, the wind cut through a person like a knife. Xavier had made camp just beyond the cemetery fence, close enough to keep watch but far enough to give her space with her grief. He did not know her name yet, did not know whose body lay beneath that pile of rocks and frozen soil. But he knew grief when he saw it, and he knew that sometimes a person needed someone nearby, even if they could not speak, even if they could not acknowledge another soul existed in the world. Xavier was 26 years old, lean and weathered from years of cattle drives and ranch work. His dark hair hung past his collar, and his blue eyes had seen more than most men his age. He had lost his own father 2 years back, buried him in Texas soil, and remembered that hollow feeling that made the world seem unreal. He remembered how his mother had stood at that grave for hours, how his sister had finally coaxed her away. This woman had no one. On the first day, he had approached her once. She sat on the ground, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face hidden behind a curtain of dark blonde hair. Her dress was simple calico, covered by a wool coat that had seen better days. She did not look up when his boots crunched on the frozen grass. "Madam," he had said softly, "can I fetch you some water, something to eat?" She had not responded, had not even twitched. Her body was so still she might have been carved from stone. He had tried once more. "It's getting cold. You should not be out here." Nothing. Not a word, not a glance. Her eyes were fixed on the grave, and Xavier realized with a sinking feeling that she was not ignoring him. She simply could not hear him. She was somewhere else, somewhere deep inside herself where the grief had pulled her down and would not let go. So he had backed away, returned to his camp, and decided to wait. The people of Chloride had noticed, of course. It was a small mining town, perched in the Surbat Mountains, and everyone knew everyone else's business. On the second day, a woman in her 50s with silver streaking her brown hair had walked up to the cemetery. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "That is Delilah Winters," she told Xavier, her voice heavy with sadness. "Her husband Samuel died 4 days ago. Mining accident up in the silver claims. Tunnel collapsed on him and 2 other men. Samuel was only 24. They had been married less than a year." Xavier absorbed this information with a slow nod. "She has been here since the burial, since before it, really. She helped dig the grave herself. Wouldn't let anyone else touch the shovel. When we finally got Samuel in the ground, she just sat down and has not gotten up since." The woman looked at Delilah with worried eyes. "I am Martha Green. I have tried talking to her, but she will not respond. Dr. Phillips came by yesterday and said sometimes grief does this to a person, locks them up inside. He said to give her time, but in this cold." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I will watch over her," Xavier said. "Make sure she is safe." Martha studied him with sharp eyes. "You are a stranger here." "Yes, madam. Name is Xavier Reed. I was passing through, but I cannot leave her like this." Something in Martha's expression softened. "You are a good man, Xavier Reed. I will bring food for both of you." She set the basket down near Xavier's camp. "There is bread and dried beef in there, some cheese. I will come back tomorrow." She had walked to Delilah then, crouched down beside her, and spoke in low, gentle tones. When Delilah did not respond, Martha had draped a thick blanket around her shoulders and walked away with tears in her eyes. Now it was the third day, and Xavier sat on a flat rock about 10 feet from Delilah, close enough to act if needed, far enough not to crowd her. He had his bedroll and supplies, and he had been careful to keep a small fire going, hoping the warmth might drift her way. The sun was climbing toward noon, pale and cold in the winter sky. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness over the cemetery. Xavier was not a man of many words, but he found himself talking to her anyway, not expecting answers, just filling the silence. "I buried my father in Texas," he said, his voice quiet. "Place called Weatherford. He was a rancher, broke horses mostly. Good man. Worked himself to the bone trying to keep our land when the drought hit. His heart gave out one day while he was mending a fence. Just dropped where he stood." Xavier stared at his hands, remembering. "My mother, she did not speak for a week after, just moved through the house like a ghost. I did not know how to help her, did not know what to say." Delilah did not move, but Xavier continued anyway. "I think grief is like being underwater. Everything is muffled and strange, and you cannot figure out which way is up. You just drift there, and breathing seems impossible." He paused, picking up a small stone and turning it over in his fingers. "But eventually, something makes you kick toward the surface. I do not know what it will be for you, madam. I just know you will find it." The hours passed slowly. Martha came by again, bringing hot soup in a covered pot. Xavier tried to get Delilah to take some, kneeling beside her and holding the cup near enough that she could smell it. Her eyes flickered, just barely, but she did not reach for it. He left it beside her anyway, hoping she might take it when he was not looking. As afternoon faded toward evening, Xavier noticed the temperature dropping again. The Arizona highlands could be deceptive. Warm enough during the day, but bitter cold once the sun went down. He moved his camp closer, setting up his bedroll so that the fire was between him and Delilah, hoping she would feel the heat. "You know, I understand if you want to stay here with him," Xavier said as he poked at the fire. "I understand not wanting to leave. But he would not want you to freeze out here. He would want you to live." Still nothing. But Xavier thought he saw her fingers twitch, just slightly, against the fabric of her skirt. Night fell, and with it came the stars, brilliant and cold overhead. Xavier wrapped himself in his coat and kept the fire fed. He dozed in fits and starts, jerking awake every hour or so to check on Delilah. She had not moved. The blanket was still around her shoulders, and her body remained in that same hunched position, arms around her knees, face hidden. The third night was the coldest yet. Xavier woke around midnight to find frost forming on his bedroll. He immediately looked to Delilah and felt his heart lurch. She was shivering, her whole body trembling with cold, but still she had not moved from her spot. He grabbed his spare blanket and approached her carefully. "Delilah," he said, using her name for the first time. "You are freezing. I am going to put this blanket on you, all right?" He draped it over her shoulders, layering it on top of the one Martha had brought. Up close, he could see her face for the first time. She was young, probably not more than 22 or 23. Her features were delicate but drawn with exhaustion and grief. Her eyes, a deep brown, stared at the grave without blinking. Her lips were pale, almost blue. "Please," Xavier said softly, "please do not die out here. Whatever you are feeling, however much it hurts, dying will not fix it. It will not bring him back." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she spoke. "I want to be with him." Her voice was hoarse, broken, barely more than a whisper. But it was something. It was a crack in the ice. Xavier sat down beside her, not too close, but near enough that she would know she was not alone. "I know you do, but that is not how it works. When we die, we do not get to choose. Your time is not now." He was everything, she whispered, and her voice broke on the last word. "We had plans. We were going to save money from the mine and buy a little ranch. We were going to have children. We were going to grow old together." "I know," Xavier said. "I know it hurts. I cannot do this without him." "You can. You do not think you can, but you will." Delilah finally turned her head just slightly and looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed and haunted. "Who are you?" "My name is Xavier Reed. I am just someone who could not ride past and leave you here alone." She studied him for a long moment, then turned back to the grave. But something had shifted. She was present now, aware of the world around her, no longer lost in that deep place where grief had taken her. "I cannot move," she said. "I have tried. My body will not obey me." "That is all right," Xavier said. "We can wait until it does." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling behind them. Then Delilah spoke again, her voice a little stronger. "Samuel was a good man. He was kind and funny, and he worked so hard. We met at a church social in Prescott. I was visiting my aunt, and he asked me to dance. I fell in love with him that night. We were married 3 months later. He sounds like someone worth loving," Xavier said. He was. A tear slid down her cheek, the first Xavier had seen. "The day before he died, we had breakfast together. He made jokes about the chickens we wanted to buy. He kissed me goodbye, and I watched him walk toward the mine. I did not know it was the last time. You could not have known. I should have made him stay home. I should have told him not to go. He would have gone anyway. Men like that, they do what needs to be done. It was not your fault." More tears came now, faster, and Delilah's shoulders began to shake. "I have been so angry. Angry at God, angry at the mine, angry at Samuel for leaving me. How can I be angry at him? He is dead, and I am angry at him." "That is part of grief," Xavier said gently. "All those feelings get tangled up together. Anger and sadness and love all mixed up until you cannot tell one from the other." Delilah turned to look at him again, really look at him this time. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me." Xavier met her eyes. "Because someone should. Because you deserve to have someone sit with you while you hurt." Something in her face crumpled then, and she began to cry in earnest, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Xavier did not try to stop her, did not try to comfort her with empty words. He just stayed beside her and let her grieve. When the worst of the crying passed, Delilah wiped at her face with shaking hands. "I am so cold," she said. "Can you stand?" Xavier asked. "I do not know. Let me help you." He stood first, then offered his hand. Delilah stared at it for a long moment before reaching out. Her hand was like ice, her fingers stiff. Xavier pulled gently, and she tried to rise, but her legs would not hold her. 3 days of sitting in one position had left her muscles cramped and weak. She would have fallen if Xavier had not caught her. "Easy," he said. "Take your time. Your body needs to remember how to work." He supported her weight, one arm around her waist, as she tried to get her legs to cooperate. It took several minutes of careful movement before she could stand on her own, and even then she was unsteady. Xavier kept a hand on her elbow, ready to catch her if she fell. "Can you walk?" he asked. Delilah took a tentative step, then another. Her legs trembled, but they held. "I think so." "There is a boarding house in town. Martha Green runs it. She has been worried about you. Let me take you there, get you warm and fed." Delilah looked back at the grave, her expression anguished. "I do not want to leave him." "You are not leaving him. You are taking care of yourself so that you can come back and visit him properly. He would want that." She hesitated, torn, but finally nodded. "All right." They walked slowly, Xavier matching her pace, his hand steady on her arm. The town of Chloride was small. Just a handful of buildings clustered along the main street. Most of the men who lived here were miners, working the silver claims in the surrounding hills. It was rough country, beautiful in its way, with the mountains rising stark and dramatic against the sky. Martha's boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure, the paint faded but the windows clean. Xavier helped Delilah up the front steps and knocked on the door. Martha answered almost immediately, her eyes widening when she saw them. "Oh, thank the Lord," she breathed. "Delilah, honey, come in, come in." She ushered them inside, into the warmth of a house that smelled like baking bread and wood smoke. Xavier felt Delilah sag against him as the heat hit her, her body finally allowing itself to feel how cold it had been. "Get her by the stove," Martha said, already moving to help. "Xavier, help me get her into this chair." They settled Delilah into a rocking chair near the large iron stove that dominated the kitchen. Martha wrapped another blanket around her and pressed a cup of hot tea into her hands. "Drink this slowly," Martha instructed. "Your body needs to warm up gradually." Delilah's hands shook as she lifted the cup to her lips. Xavier stood back, feeling suddenly out of place now that they were inside, now that Delilah was in capable hands. "You should sit too," Martha said, turning to him. "You have been out in that cold for 3 days as well." "I am fine, madam." "Nonsense. Sit." She pointed to another chair and Xavier obeyed. Martha bustled around the kitchen, heating up soup, slicing bread, moving with the efficiency of a woman who had spent her life taking care of others. Delilah sipped her tea slowly, her eyes distant. Xavier watched her, relieved to see color returning to her cheeks, but worried about what would happen next. Grief did not end just because you got up from the graveside. It followed you, settled into your bones, changed the shape of your life. Martha set bowls of soup in front of both of them. "Eat," she said. "Both of you." The soup was thick with vegetables and chunks of beef, and Xavier realized he was hungrier than he had thought. He ate quietly, aware of Delilah across from him, picking at her food with no real interest. "Delilah," Martha said gently, sitting down at the table with them. "You can stay here as long as you need. Your room is still available." "I do not have money to pay you," Delilah said, her voice flat. "I am not asking for money. You are grieving your husband." "That matters more than room and board." Delilah nodded, but Xavier could see the shame in her expression. Pride was a hard thing to swallow, especially when it was all you had left. "I need to find work," Delilah said. "I cannot just take charity. There will be time for that. Right now, you need to rest and heal." But Xavier could see the determination settling into Delilah's features. She was the kind of woman who needed purpose, who could not sit idle even in grief. He understood that. Some people needed to keep moving or they would drown. After they finished eating, Martha showed Delilah upstairs to her room. Xavier stayed in the kitchen, warming his hands by the stove. When Martha returned, she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. "Thank you for watching over her," she said. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there." "I could not leave her," Xavier said simply. "Most men would have." Xavier did not respond to that. He had never understood people who could walk past suffering and do nothing. It seemed to him that the bare minimum of being human was to help when you could. "What are your plans?" Martha asked. "Were you just passing through?" "I was heading to Silver City. Have a friend there who runs a ranch, said he might have work for me. Will you stay a while?" "I think Delilah could use a friend." Xavier considered this. He had no pressing need to be in Silver City. His friend's offer was open-ended. And the truth was, he found himself reluctant to leave. Something about Delilah had gotten under his skin. Maybe it was the way she had looked so lost, or maybe it was the strength it had taken for her to finally stand up and walk away from that grave. Either way, he wanted to make sure she would be all right. "I will stay a few days," he said. "Make sure she is settled." Martha smiled. "You are a good man, Xavier Reed. There is a room available on the 2nd floor if you need a place to stay. I will give you the same rate I give the miners." "Thank you, madam. I appreciate that." That night, Xavier lay in a real bed for the first time in weeks and found he could not sleep. He kept thinking about Delilah, about the grief in her eyes, about the way she had been unable to move. He had seen men broken by loss before, but there was something about her that struck him differently. Maybe because she was so young. Maybe because her husband had been so young. They should have had a lifetime ahead of them, and instead she was left with nothing but memories and a grave in the frozen ground. The next morning, Xavier woke to the sound of voices downstairs. He dressed and made his way to the kitchen, where he found Martha and Delilah sitting at the table. Delilah looked better. Still pale, still hollowed out by grief, but more present. She had changed clothes and braided her hair, and she held a cup of coffee like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. "Good morning," Martha said when she saw Xavier. "There is coffee on the stove and biscuits in the basket." "Thank you." Xavier poured himself a cup and took a biscuit, then sat down at the table. He caught Delilah's eye, and she gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. "I was just telling Delilah that the general store needs someone to help with inventory and sales," Martha said. "Mr. Patterson mentioned it last week. It would not be hard work, and it would give her something to do." "I will go talk to him today," Delilah said. Her voice was stronger than it had been last night, though still edged with exhaustion. "Are you sure you are ready for that?" Xavier asked. Delilah looked at him, and he saw a fierce determination in her eyes. "I have to be. I cannot just sit and wallow. Samuel would not want that." "He would want me to keep going," Xavier nodded. "Then I will walk with you if you do not mind the company." "I do not mind." After breakfast, they walked together through the crisp morning air. Chloride was waking up around them, miners heading toward the hills, women opening shops and hanging laundry. People stared at Delilah, some with pity, others with curiosity. Xavier could see her shoulders tense under the scrutiny, but she kept her chin up and her eyes forward. The general store was a cluttered space filled with everything from mining equipment to dry goods to bolts of fabric. Mr. Patterson was a portly man in his 50s with a graying beard and kind eyes. He looked up when they entered, and his expression softened when he saw Delilah. "Mrs. Winters," he said gently. "I was so sorry to hear about Samuel. He was a good man." "Thank you," Delilah said. "I heard you might need help in the store." Mr. Patterson glanced at Xavier, then back to Delilah. "I do. Can you read and write?" "Yes, sir." "Can you do sums?" "Yes." "Then the job is yours if you want it. I cannot pay much, but it is honest work." "When can I start?" "Tomorrow, if you are ready." Delilah nodded. "I will be here." They left the store, and Xavier could see relief in Delilah's face. She had purpose now, something to fill the empty hours. As they walked back toward the boarding house, she turned to him. "You do not have to keep watching over me," she said. "I will be all right. I know you will. But I am not ready to move on just yet. Figure I will stick around a few more days, see the area." Something flickered in her eyes, something that might have been gratitude or relief or both. "Would you come with me to the cemetery this afternoon? I want to visit Samuel, but I am not sure I can face it alone yet." "Of course." That afternoon, they walked back to the small cemetery on the edge of town. The day was warmer, the sun breaking through the clouds, and the frozen ground had softened just slightly. Delilah stood at Samuel's grave, and Xavier stayed a few steps back, giving her space. She knelt down and placed her hand on the dirt. "I am sorry I was so angry," she said softly. "I know it was not your fault. I know you did not want to leave me." Her voice broke, and she took a shaky breath. "I am going to try to keep living, Samuel. I am going to try to make you proud. But I miss you so much it feels like I cannot breathe." Xavier looked away, giving her privacy for her tears. When she finally stood and turned to him, her eyes were red but clear. "Thank you," she said, "for sitting with me, for not leaving." "You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do." You saved my life, Xavier Reed. I know that. They walked back to town in companionable silence, and Xavier felt something shift between them. It was not romance, not yet. It was something quieter, something that grew in the spaces between words. It was the beginning of trust. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Delilah worked at the general store during the day, and Xavier found odd jobs around town. He repaired fences, helped with repairs at the boarding house, mucked stalls at the livery. In the evenings, they would sit together in Martha's kitchen, talking about small things. The weather, the town, memories that were safe to share. Xavier learned that Delilah had grown up in Prescott, that her parents had died when she was 16, and that she had been living with her aunt before she met Samuel. She had been a seamstress, good with her hands, and she missed that work. She told him about Samuel, about the way he had courted her with wildflowers and bad poetry, about the small cabin they had rented on the edge of town, about their plans for the future. Xavier told her about his family in Texas, about his mother and sister, about the ranch he had grown up on. He told her about the years he had spent drifting after his father died, working cattle drives and ranch jobs, never quite feeling like he fit anywhere. "You want to keep drifting?" Delilah asked one evening. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I do not know," Xavier said honestly. "Part of me wants to find a place to settle, but another part of me thinks I am not the settling type." "You seem like someone who would be good at settling," Delilah said. "You are steady, reliable. Those are qualities that matter." Xavier looked at her, and for the first time he allowed himself to really see her, not just as a grieving widow, but as a woman. She was beautiful in a quiet way, with expressive eyes and a mouth that looked like it had been made for smiling, even though she rarely did now. There was a strength in her that he admired, a resilience that kept her moving forward even when she wanted to stop. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you want?" Delilah was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know if I am allowed to want anything anymore. It feels like I used up all my wishes on Samuel, and now that he is gone, I do not get any more." "That is not how it works. You are allowed to have a future, Delilah. You are allowed to want things. It feels like a betrayal." "It is not. It is being human." She looked at him, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went deeper than words. Xavier felt his heart skip in his chest, and he realized with a start that he was falling for her. It was too soon, too complicated, and probably a terrible idea, but the feeling was there nonetheless, undeniable and growing stronger every day. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Xavier stayed in Chloride, telling himself he was just making sure Delilah was all right, but knowing deep down that he was staying for other reasons. He liked being near her. He liked the way her smile was starting to come back, small and tentative but real. He liked the way she laughed at his stories, the way she listened when he talked, the way she looked at him sometimes like he was something special. But he was also careful. He did not push, did not rush. He knew she was still grieving, still healing, and he would not do anything to hurt her. One evening in late February, Delilah asked him to walk with her to the cemetery. They had fallen into the habit of going together once a week, and Xavier had noticed that these visits were getting easier for her. She could talk about Samuel now without breaking down, could remember him with fondness instead of just pain. They stood at the grave, and Delilah was quiet for a long time. Then she turned to Xavier. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what you said about being allowed to have a future. I think you were right. I am glad," Xavier said. "I will always love Samuel, he will always be part of me, but I am starting to realize that I am still alive, and that means something. It means I have to keep living." "That is true." Delilah took a deep breath. I am also starting to realize that I have feelings for you, Xavier, and I do not know what to do about that. Xavier's heart stuttered. He had hoped, but he had not been sure. You do not have to do anything about it. We can take this as slow as you need. What if I do not want to go slow? What if I want to feel something other than grief? Then we go at whatever pace feels right to you. But Delilah, I need you to know that I care about you. This is not just about filling empty time for me. I think I am falling in love with you. Delilah's eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears this time. Not grief, but something else. Something that might have been hope. I think I am falling in love with you too, she whispered. And it terrifies me. Why? Because I lost Samuel so quickly. We had less than a year together. What if I let myself love you and then I lose you too? Xavier stepped closer and took her hands in his. You might. That is the risk of loving anyone. But Delilah, you cannot live your life in fear of loss. You will miss everything good if you do. I know. I know you are right, but knowing and feeling are two different things. Then let me help you feel safe. Let me show you that I am not going anywhere. Delilah looked up at him, and Xavier saw the war playing out in her eyes, fear against hope, grief against the possibility of new love. Finally, something in her face softened and she stepped closer to him. Kiss me, she said. Please. Xavier cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. Then he leaned down and kissed her, gentle and careful and full of promise. Delilah's arms came up around his neck, and she kissed him back with a desperation that spoke of her need to feel alive, to feel something other than sorrow. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I am not going anywhere, he said. I promise you that. Do not make promises you cannot keep, Delilah said, but there was no heat in her words. I am not. I am here, Delilah, for as long as you want me. They walked back to town hand in hand, and Xavier felt like something fundamental had shifted in the world. He had come to Chloride by accident, just passing through, and now he could not imagine being anywhere else. This woman, this place, they had become his in a way he had not expected. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. They were careful about it, aware of the town's eyes on them, aware that some people would judge Delilah for moving on so quickly. But they also could not deny what they felt. Xavier courted her properly, bringing her flowers, taking her on walks, sitting with her in the evenings and talking about everything and nothing. Martha approved, which helped. She told anyone who would listen that Xavier was a good man and that Delilah deserved happiness. Mr. Patterson also supported them, saying that life was too short to waste on other people's opinions. Not everyone was kind. There were whispers, sharp looks, a few women who thought Delilah should mourn longer, but Delilah held her head high and ignored them. She had learned, through her grief, that life was precious and uncertain, and she was not going to waste it worrying about what others thought. In April, Xavier finally took her to see the cabin where she had lived with Samuel. She had not been back since his death, too afraid of the memories. But she said she was ready now, and Xavier believed her. The cabin was small and weathered, sitting on a patch of land just outside town. Inside, everything was as Delilah had left it. Dust covered the furniture and the air smelled stale, but Xavier could see the care they had put into making it a home. There were curtains on the windows, a quilt on the bed, Samuel's boots still by the door. Delilah walked through slowly, touching things, remembering. Xavier stayed near the door, giving her space. When she finally turned to him, there were tears on her face, but she was smiling. This was a good place, she said. We were happy here, I can see that. But it is not my place anymore. I need to let it go. Are you sure? Delilah nodded. I am sure. I want to move forward with you, Xavier. That means leaving some things behind. They packed up the cabin that afternoon, sorting through Samuel's belongings, deciding what to keep and what to give away. It was hard work, both physically and emotionally, but it was also healing. By the time they were done, the sun was setting and Delilah looked lighter than she had in months. "What will you do with the cabin?" Xavier asked. "I will sell it. Use the money to start fresh." "Start fresh how?" Delilah turned to him, and there was a spark in her eyes that he had not seen before. "I have been thinking. You said you wanted to settle down, find a place to belong. What if we did that together?" "What are you saying?" "I am saying I want to marry you, Xavier Reed, if you will have me." Xavier felt his breath catch. "Are you sure? We have only been together a few months." "I am sure. I know what I want. I learned that from losing Samuel. Life is too short to hesitate when you find something good." Xavier pulled her into his arms and kissed her, long and deep and full of joy. "Yes," he said when they finally broke apart. "Yes, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." They were married in May, a simple ceremony at the small church in Chloride. Martha stood as Delilah's witness, and the owner of the livery stood as Xavier's. The whole town turned out, and even the people who had disapproved seemed to soften when they saw how happy Delilah looked. She wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue with delicate embroidery, and she carried wildflowers that Xavier had picked that morning. When she walked down the aisle toward him, Xavier felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was beautiful and she was choosing him, and he could not believe his luck. They said their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other, to stand together through whatever came. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Xavier kissed her to the sound of applause and cheers. After the ceremony, Martha hosted a small celebration at the boarding house. There was food and music, and for the first time in months, Delilah truly laughed. It was a sound Xavier wanted to hear for the rest of his life. That night, in the room at the boarding house that was now theirs, Xavier held Delilah close and marveled at how much his life had changed. A few months ago, he had been a drifter with no real direction. Now he had a wife, a purpose, and a place he could call home. "Are you happy?" he asked Delilah, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "I am," she said. "I did not think I could be, but I am. You gave me that, Xavier. You gave me a reason to keep living. You gave yourself that reason. I just sat with you until you found it." Delilah turned in his arms to look at him. "You did more than sit with me. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. You waited for me. You were patient and kind, and you never pushed. That is what saved me." Xavier kissed her forehead. "I love you, Delilah Reed. I love you too, and I always will." They talked late into the night, making plans for their future. Xavier had been offered a job managing the livery, a position that came with a small house on the edge of town. It was not much, but it would be theirs. Delilah wanted to go back to sewing, maybe open a small dress shop. They talked about children, about the life they would build together, about growing old in this little mining town in the Arizona highlands. The house came with the job at the livery was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a front porch that looked out over the mountains. Xavier and Delilah spent their first weeks as a married couple fixing it up, painting the walls, mending the roof, planting a small garden. It was hard work, but it was joyful work, the kind that made them fall into bed exhausted but satisfied every night. Delilah did open her dress shop, working out of a small room in the front of their house. She was talented, and word spread quickly. Women came from all over the area to have her make dresses for weddings and special occasions. She also did mending and alterations, and within a few months, she had more work than she could handle. Xavier thrived at the livery. He was good with horses, patient and skilled, and he liked the steady nature of the work. He liked having a place to be every day, like being part of the community. Chloride was growing. New people arriving every week to work the mines, and Xavier felt like he was helping build something. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. Xavier never stopped marveling at the fact that this was his life now, that this woman was his wife. One evening in late summer, Delilah told him she was pregnant. Xavier felt his heart stop, then start again, beating so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Martha confirmed it. We are going to have a baby, Xavier." He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, overwhelmed with joy and fear and love all tangled together. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Delilah asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Happy does not even begin to cover it. "I am terrified and ecstatic and so full of love I do not know what to do with it all." Delilah laughed, that beautiful sound that Xavier loved more than anything. "That is exactly how I feel." The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah was sick for the first few months, and Xavier hovered over her like a worried hen, much to her amusement. But as the months passed and her belly grew, she bloomed. She had never looked more beautiful to Xavier than she did carrying their child. They prepared together, turning the second room of their house into a nursery. Xavier built a cradle from scratch, working late into the night to get it perfect. Delilah sewed baby clothes and blankets, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had been sewing her whole life. In late February of 1883, almost exactly a year after Xavier had first found Delilah at that grave, their son was born. It was a long labor, and Xavier paced outside the room while Martha and the midwife helped Delilah through it. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Martha came out, her face flushed but smiling. "You have a healthy son, Xavier, and Delilah is fine. Tired, but fine." Xavier rushed into the room and found Delilah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle in her arms. When she looked up at him, her eyes were full of tears and joy. "Come meet your son," she said. Xavier approached slowly, almost afraid he would break the moment. He looked down at the baby in Delilah's arms and felt his entire world shift. The baby was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on his parents. "He is perfect," Xavier breathed. "He is," Delilah agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, but now, looking at his son, Xavier knew. "Samuel," he said. "After your first husband, he should carry that name forward." Delilah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Samuel Winters was a good man and he loved you. Our son should honor that." "Samuel Xavier Reed," Delilah said, trying out the name. "It sounds right." Xavier leaned down and kissed first Delilah, then the baby's forehead. "It sounds perfect." The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Xavier had never known he could love someone so much, so instantly. He would wake in the middle of the night to the sound of Samuel crying and feel his heart clench with a fierce protectiveness. He would watch Delilah nurse their son and feel overwhelmed by the beauty of it, by the miracle of this life they had created. Delilah was a natural mother, patient and loving and endlessly capable. But Xavier could also see the shadows that sometimes crossed her face. She was thinking about her first husband, about the future they had planned that would never be. Xavier understood. He had never met Samuel Winters, but he felt a strange kinship with him, a gratitude that this man had loved Delilah first, had shown her what love could be. One afternoon, when Samuel was about 6 months old, Xavier came home from the livery to find Delilah sitting on the porch, the baby asleep in her arms, tears streaming down her face. He sat down beside her immediately. "What is wrong? Is it Samuel? Are you hurt?" "No," Delilah said, wiping at her tears. I am fine. The baby is fine. I was just thinking. About what? About how much my life has changed. About how I almost did not make it through last year. If you had not stayed with me, Xavier, if you had not sat with me at that grave and waited for me to come back to myself, I would not be here. I would not have this beautiful life, this baby, this happiness. I owe you everything. Xavier put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. You do not owe me anything. You did the hard work of healing. I just kept you company while you did it. You did more than that. You showed me that I could love again. You gave me hope when I had none. And you gave me a home, a family. You gave me a reason to stop drifting and start building something real. They sat together, watching the sun set over the mountains, their baby sleeping peacefully between them. Xavier thought about that cold January day when he had first seen Delilah at the grave. He thought about how he had almost ridden past, almost left her there. But something had made him stop. Something had made him stay. He believed now that it was fate, or destiny, or whatever force in the universe brought people together when they needed each other most. He had saved Delilah, yes, but she had also saved him. She had given him purpose, direction, a reason to believe in the future. As the years passed, their family grew. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose and another son they named James. The house on the edge of Chloride became filled with laughter and noise and love. Xavier expanded the livery, eventually buying it from the original owner and running it as his own business. Delilah's dress shop flourished, and she took on an apprentice, a young woman from town who wanted to learn the trade. They were happy. Not in a perfect, uncomplicated way, but in the real, messy, beautiful way that came from choosing each other every day. They fought sometimes, disagreed about how to raise the children or manage money or handle the inevitable challenges that came with life. But they always came back to each other, always remembered what they had survived together. Delilah never forgot Samuel. Every year on the anniversary of his death, she would visit his grave, and Xavier would go with her. She would tell their children about him, about the good man he had been, about the love they had shared. Xavier never felt threatened by this. He understood that the human heart was big enough to hold multiple loves, and that honoring Samuel's memory did not diminish what he and Delilah had built together. Samuel, their eldest son, grew up strong and kind, with his mother's eyes and his father's steady nature. He asked questions about his namesake, and Delilah answered them honestly, telling him about the man who had loved her first. Young Samuel seemed to take pride in carrying that name, in being connected to a man who had been brave enough to work the mines, who had dreamed of a better future. Rose was fierce and independent, always climbing trees and getting into trouble. She had Xavier's dark hair and Delilah's determination, and Xavier knew she was going to be a force to be reckoned with when she grew up. James was the quiet one, thoughtful and observant, always watching the world with curious eyes. Xavier taught all of them to ride, to care for horses, to be honest and hardworking. Delilah taught them to sew, to read, to value education and creativity. Together, they built a life that was rich in love and purpose. As the children grew older and more independent, Xavier and Delilah found time for each other again. They would take rides out into the hills, just the 2 of them, remembering what it had been like when they first fell in love. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and talking about their day, about their hopes for the future, about how grateful they were for the life they had built. One evening, when they were in their 40s and their children were nearly grown, Delilah turned to Xavier with a soft smile. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Stopping in Chloride that day. You were just passing through. You could have had a completely different life." Xavier considered this. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. I wonder where I would have ended up if I had kept riding, but I do not regret it, not for a second. Everything good in my life came from the decision to stay with you that day." "I think about it too," Delilah said. "I think about how close I came to dying there, how close I came to letting the grief swallow me whole. And then I think about how you just sat there, day after day, waiting for me to find my way back. Most people would have given up. Most people would have assumed I was lost. You were never lost. You were just grieving. There is a difference. I know that now, but I did not know it then." Xavier pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, comfortable in the silence, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. "I love you," Delilah said. "I loved Samuel, and I will always carry that with me. But what I have with you, Xavier, it is different. It is deeper. We built this together. We chose each other every day. That means something." "It means everything," Xavier said. The years continued to pass. Samuel, their eldest, eventually took over the livery when Xavier was ready to step back. He married a school teacher from Kingman, and they had children of their own. Rose, true to form, refused to settle down, instead traveling to California to work in a dress shop in San Francisco, where she became known for her bold designs and independent spirit. James became a writer, documenting the history of the Arizona Territory and the people who had built it. Xavier and Delilah became grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. They would sit on the porch with their grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, about how the West had changed, about the importance of family and love and perseverance. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming lined and weathered. But Xavier never stopped seeing Delilah as that young woman he had sat beside in the cemetery, the woman who had been strong enough to stand up and walk away from her grief. And Delilah never stopped seeing Xavier as the cowboy who had refused to leave her side, who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate. The house was full of noise and laughter, and Xavier stood in the middle of it all, marveling at what they had created. 30 years ago, he had been a drifter with no home and no purpose. Now he had this, a family, a legacy, a life rich with meaning. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Xavier and Delilah lay in bed together, her head resting on his chest, his arms around her. 30 years, Delilah murmured. "It feels like a lifetime and like no time at all." "I know what you mean," Xavier said. "Sometimes I still feel like that young cowboy who did not know what he was doing. But then I look at everything we have built and I realize we must have done something right. We did more than something right. We did everything right." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "I would do it all again. Every moment, every choice, it all led me to you, and me to you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the love they had built over 3 decades. It was a love that had been forged in grief and grown through patience and understanding. It was a love that had weathered storms and celebrated joys. It was a love that would last the rest of their lives. As Xavier drifted off to sleep, he thought about that cold January day in 1882, when he had seen a woman frozen in grief at a graveside. He thought about the decision to stay, to wait, to simply be present while she found her way back to life. It had been the most important decision of his life, and he would be grateful for it every day until his last. Years later, when Xavier was in his 60s, he would still make the ride out to the cemetery with Delilah. They would visit Samuel Winters' grave together, and Delilah would tell her first husband about their children, about the life she had built, about the happiness she had found. And then she would take Xavier's hand, and they would walk back to town together. 2 people who had found each other in the darkest moment, and had built something beautiful from the ashes of grief. Xavier Reed had been a cowboy, a drifter, a man with no real home, but he had become so much more. He had become a husband, a father, a grandfather. He had become the foundation on which a family was built, and it had all started with the simple act of sitting beside a grieving woman and refusing to leave until she was ready to stand. That was love, he thought. Not just the grand gestures or the passionate moments. Love was sitting in the cold and waiting. Love was believing in someone when they could not believe in themselves. Love was patience and presence and the willingness to stay even when things were hard. And in the end, that love had given him everything he had ever wanted and so much more than he had ever dreamed possible. When Xavier was 72 years old, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, Delilah beside him. The whole town turned out for his funeral, a testament to the life he had lived and the people he had touched. He was buried in the cemetery on the edge of Chloride, not far from Samuel Winters' grave, and Delilah made sure his headstone reflected the man he had been. Xavier Reed. Beloved husband, father, and friend, he sat with me until I could move. Delilah lived another 5 years after Xavier's death. She was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and though she grieved for her second husband as she had grieved for her first, she did not freeze this time. She kept moving, kept living, kept honoring the lesson that Xavier had taught her all those years ago. That life was precious and worth living, even when it hurt. When Delilah died at the age of 79, she was buried beside Xavier, their graves side by side, a final testament to the love they had built together. Their children made sure both headstones stood tall and proud, marking the resting places of two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had created a legacy of love that would endure for generations. The story of the cowboy who sat with the grieving widow became part of Chloride's history, passed down through the years as an example of compassion and patience and the transformative power of love. People would visit the cemetery and see the 3 graves in a row: Samuel Winters, Xavier Reed, and Delilah Reed, and they would know the story. They would know that grief could be survived, that love could be found even in the darkest places, and that sometimes the greatest act of love was simply being present while someone found their way back to life. And so the legacy continued, a reminder that in the wild and unforgiving landscape of the American West, in a time when life was hard and death was always close, the human capacity for love and compassion could still flourish. The cowboy who had been passing through had stayed and built a life. The widow who had been frozen in grief had learned to move again. And together, they had created something that would last far beyond their own lives, a love story that proved that even in the hardest moments, hope could be found, and happiness was possible, and the simple act of sitting beside someone in their pain could change everything.